we're looking at the landscape of the 12 teams in this league, you can point at certain clubs and say, okay, well, those are going to be contenders moving forward. And I think it goes without saying that when you look at Portland Thorns as the reigning NWSL champions, that is just an automatic target for this team. Let's talk a little bit about their offseason. Let's start with a team overview for the Thorns. They had an interesting offseason. I think that's the best way we could put it, because they had a lot of attention on the front office and the technical staff side of things. Because when we get to the roster portion of this, there's not a whole lot of changes, but we see a lot of different things going on for this team going into 2023. When we look at the technical staff, they promoted former goalkeeping coach Mike Norris to head coach after the resignation of Ryan Wilkinson in December 2022. We're talking just weeks, really months, maybe, after winning the NWSL Championship. And so they went ahead and just promoted from within, trying, I guess, in an attempt to try to retain some of the culture and apparently taking some player feedback as well, and want to run with the as much of the same team as possible moving forward. And I guess that also includes the technical staff, which is why when we saw the consequences drop for an investigation around this club, it included some swift changes for the technical staff side of things. The Portland Thorns are no longer with assistant coach Sophie Claw and trainer Pierre Sobrier, following an investigation into various allegations of misconduct. We talked a little bit about this on an episode specifically. Within this investigation, the league had made a release issuing some transparent updates about those investigations with the Thorns specifically, but also the Washington Spirit. So they were announced adjacent to each other, but there was a lot more within this investigation for the Thorns. Essentially, the league announced that there were investigations involving the Thorns that included several individuals who essentially were terminated by the club, and some are now ineligible for employment with the league in the near future, pending some conditions. Former trainer Pierre Sobrier was found to have given codeine to players without a prescription. And Sophie Clo has to go through some trainings if she wants to, try and, get another position in this league, because there were allegations of inappropriate behavior. So big changes, I think, when you're looking at that. It's not just like, hey, we promoted a head coach because our other head coach resigned. This is a technical staff that was with this team all throughout the duration of their championship run.
Yeah, I think that's the most interesting kind of part about it, is that immediately after this team wins the NWSL Championship, it's found out that they have been going through a bit of an investigation, not only with some technical staff and medical misconduct on that front, but also with their head coach and a little bit of misconduct there, and two separate investigations happening. And this really all came to a head right after the season ended, right? The new head coach in Mike Norris was hired January 9th. This was right after the season ended, right before the NWSL draft for this year. So it all happened very quickly on the heels of a championship, and on the heels of, or really at the start of, what could have been a very celebratory offseason for this team. And I think still was very celebratory because they won the league, and that's massive. But they then had to face a little bit of poor news, right? And poor news circulation because of what was happening in these investigations, which changed a lot of kind of how the offseason went, I think, for them. But in terms of the overall changes for this team, like, the main ones happened in the front office, not with the personnel and the players by any means.
No, when we're looking at the overview of this team, it really is just about the sort of rotating bench. And we don't mean that in terms of the players. It really is just the extended staff. I mean, and that also includes, we can also really include Heather Davis, being appointed as the CEO of the Portland franchises, both the Timber and the Thorns. But in terms of revisiting this team, the players who are going to play on the pitch in this regular season, a lot of the 2022 roster was retained to go ahead and compete and try to run it back in 2023. They finished in the standings in number 2 with a 10-9-3 record. So they narrowly missed out on the Shield to OL Reign. But that still meant that they got that bye straight to the semifinal. They were able to go ahead and advance to the finals and then ended up winning the whole dang thing out in DC. So when we looked at
And
their
dominant
season,
winning the whole
oh
thing
my
out
God,
DC, like,
yeah,
it
Sophia
was
Smith.
a stamp on it. It was not a close game
No,
against
no,
Kansas
no.
City.
Which was interesting because we were
Yeah.
curious how that was gonna look. There's some players on the Thorns that had never experienced a championship final like that, and yet they went out there and they did the thing. We were curious, with that win, what that would mean for this roster in the off season. Was there going to be, we're going to see a lot of turnover. We knew that Christine Sinclair was one of those players that were going to be probably sought after on the free agency list. She met the eligibility requirement as someone who has had more than 6 years of playing service within NWSL. What was going to happen there? She announced with enthusiasm at a trophy celebration rally that she was going to come back with the team for one more year so that they can try to chase a 4th championship specifically. But not a ton of major movement, but that doesn't necessarily mean they had a poor offseason. We gave them an off-season grade of a B, a solid B for Portland. And I think a big part of that was due to the fact that they did retain so much of their roster, but we also really liked how they navigated the draft.
Yeah.
They entered draft day with just one pick, and all of a sudden they found themselves with 2 top selections in the first round, a number 5 selection and the number 12 selection. They ended up selecting Reina Reyes out of Alabama, Izzy Diakia from Santa Clara, but they also made some additional picks for depth in their later rounds, forward Lauren DeBow and the goalkeeper Lori Cazal from Michigan State, both at number 24 and number 32 respectively. So, I mean, I think there's something to be said that you're a championship caliber winning team and you want to retain most of those pieces. That's
Yeah.
a successful offseason. I think if you could do that.
Yeah, I agree completely because not only did they re-sign Christine Sinclair, which could have arguably been one of the biggest free agents if she hadn't re-signed as soon as they lifted that trophy. I mean, good for her. She wants to stay in Portland. Christine Sinclair will finish out her career, her professional career in Portland. I have no doubt about that. But they also re-signed Costa Rican international Rocky Rodriguez, who has been a big part of the glue of this midfield for this Thorns team. And then the breakout rookie for the Portland Thorns last year in Sam Coffey, who got a crack at the U.S. women's national team, who's been in the World Cup talk for the United States over the last several months. It was a Rookie of the Year nomination for that Portland Thorns season that she had playing the defensive mid, arguably one of a more veteran position on a pitch to have a rookie step in and play there. And not only that, but the fact that a championship team that lifts the trophy, wins the title one year, 2 months later is getting 2 first-round draft picks, like, fantastic. What is your
Win.
secret, Portland Thorns? Like, that is fantastic. That's not how it's supposed to happen. For those that are not usually American fans and the draft is a bit confusing to them, usually the winner of the season prior gets last pick going into the draft. So they don't get to pick top talent in the first round, even the second round sometimes, because they just won. They've already got a stacked team. They're coming off a championship season. That's how these drafts work in America. And Portland somehow finagles their way into 2 first-round draft picks. And not only 2 first-round draft picks, 2 massive picks in Reina Reyes and Izzy Diakia. Massive picks for those teams and that team and those players. That's why we give them a B. And I stand by that B because also not that many changes needed to be made, but I think they still added what they needed to. And I also think the way that Portland handled the new coaching hire, it was definitely not what they wanted to do, right? Have to hire a new coach after they just win the championship. So they stick with someone that's already been in the family. Mike Norris hired before the 2022 season and was an assistant throughout their championship run, and now can slot into that head manager role right as soon as Rian Wilkinson leaves. And it's not too much of a hiccup for the team. I think they handled that pretty well.
I think it's important to note that they wanted to try to get player feedback,
Yeah.
in this process, and that's ultimately something that led to just the eventual promotion of Norris into the role. And I think, the offseason could go by pretty quickly, in a blink. So there actually isn't as much time as I think people anticipate to try to find not just the head coach, but the right coach, because that's something else that we've had to cover when we talk about NWSL and hiring practices over the last 2 years. It's a different type of practice now. The vetting process is not what it used to be in the first decade of this league, where a lot of times it was just not as many checks and balances, and that just is no longer the case anymore in this league. I remember when you and I had to cover the Red Stars head coaching hiring process, and hearing from Chris Petroselli and saying how it was the most strenuous hiring process that he had ever been through. And he's someone who's been around the game for quite some time, both at the collegiate level and even with amongst national team programs. And he was like, this was very, very intense.
Yeah.
So, you have to imagine trying to cast a wide scope in a very, very limited amount of time in your off season. And I think for the Thorns to try to get as much feedback as they could from their players to ultimately try to retain what they had built last season is a plus for them moving forward. But, I guess that could be considered, when we're looking at losses that this team suffered in the offseason, that is technically a loss. I mean, you are put in a position to where you have to make a new head coaching hire. They also witnessed the retirement of a player in Melissa Everett, who's actually going to make the choice to go on back to school, wants to go and become a nurse. But they also, in order to get those extra picks in the first round, they said farewell to Yasmin Ryan, who was an essential piece for this team down the stretch, really in that second half of the season, all the way through to the championship final. We want to talk about players who had excellent games in those big time moments. Yasmin Ryan was one of those players. So, pretty significant player to move in a trade with Gotham FC. But you're talking 1 to 2 players from an entire championship roster. That's not a bad turnout for your offseason, I think, if you're the Thorns.
I agree completely. Yeah, I mean, for sure, the biggest loss for Portland is Yasmin Ryan. I mean, all the wellest of wishes to Marissa Everett and the time she put in with this league and with this team. But Yasmin Ryan is a player that had invested in Portland, and Portland invested in Ryan, because when you look back to 2 years ago, 2021, Yasmin Ryan was a player that stood in the wings a lot, worked really hard in training, and just wasn't really able to get her moment to shine. She was able to come in during the Olympic stretch and get significant time, but it was really just fill in a hole for the superstars that were gone and missing on an international break. And that's what happened with Ryan in 2021. In 2022, in speaking with the coaching staff at Portland, Ryan is a player that worked her tail off in the offseason to become a starting player, to push someone out of a starting position and make it hers. And we saw that evolution of a player of Ryan throughout the 2022 season, that by the end, she is a consistent starter in the lineup. She's consistently engaged in the attacking part of the field, contributing to goal scoring opportunities in the build up to goal scoring plays. Now, a lot of the goal scoring fell to someone like a Sophia Smith when you look at this Portland Thorns roster, but Ryan was part of it, getting tackles in the 18-yard box to win the ball over and to start the high counter press, to be a flank player and send crosses into the box, and then immediately be that defensive wingback that Portland needed. Ryan fed into the Portland Thorns system, and Portland, they worked really well together, I'm going to say. And with this massive trade that happened, Yasmin Ryan went from Portland to LA for a couple hours and ends up in Gotham, which a team that, I mean, we talked about it, but with Ryan not being at Portland anymore, I think that's one of the biggest losses for this team because now they have to fill a hole that they most recently filled with a player like Ryan.